Greetings, everyone. Welcome back. We're going to continue on looking at veganism today. Veganism is the practice of abstaining from the use of animal products, particularly in diet, and an associated philosophy that rejects the commodity status of animals. Basically, there are three distinct categories, yet overlapping. Dietary vegans, or strict vegetarians, refrain from consuming animal products, meat, eggs, dairy, honey, etc. Ethical vegans are practice the vegan diet plus oppose the use of animals for any purpose. And environmental vegans avoid animal products due to environmentally damaging and unsustainable industrial farming of animals. Since ethical veganism seems to be the predominant definition today, we're going to continue on in that vein. The book of Genesis 1:26. Adam is given dominion over the fish in the sea, and over the fowl of the air, and over the cattle, and over all the earth, and every creeping thing that creepeth upon the earth. Dominion implies supremacy, domination, superiority, authority, mastery, control, and even property. However, it's been pointed out that man should have dominion over animals as parents have dominion over their children, with no right to abuse them or kill them. Aristotle argued that animals lacked reason, or logos. He therefore placed them far below humans in the great chain of being. Here's the great chain of being. René Descartes, the 7th century French philosopher's attitudes toward animals, as described in his Meditations, was that they were mere automata, or mechanical robots. He believed that only humans are conscious, have minds and souls, can learn and have language, and therefore only humans are deserving of compassion. John Locke was the English Enlightenment philosopher and physician, father of liberalism. He argued against Descartes in Some Thoughts Concerning Education of 1693. He believed animals did have feelings, and unnecessary cruelty toward them was morally wrong, but only insofar as it damaged the human being who was being cruel. Locke's position echoed that of St. Thomas Aquinas, the 13th century Italian Dominican friar. The argument can be found in 1 Corinthians 9:10. 1 Corinthians is the 7th book of the New Testament, divided into 7 parts, written by Paul the Apostle. Here's a painting by Caravaggio of the conversion of Paul, AD 33-36. For it is written in the law of Moses, "Do not muzzle an ox while it is treading out the grain." Is it for oxen that God is concerned? Does he not speak entirely for our sake? It was written for our sake. Therefore, humans had no direct duty to non-human animals, only a duty to protect humans from the effects of engaging in cruelty. Immanuel Kant is the 18th century German philosopher. He also believed that, quote, cruelty to animals is contrary to man's duty to himself, because it deadens in him the feeling of sympathy for their sufferings, unquote. This is William Hogarth, the English painter and printmaker, satirist and social critic, cartoonist, and also an early animal welfare advocate. Here he is portrayed with his pug called Trump. In illustrating Locke and Kant's position of cruelty merely harming the actor and not the beast, is his 4 stages of cruelty. This is a graphic sequential art which led to the present comic strip that we have today. The first stage depicts the torture of various animals in London street life. The story focuses on Tom Nero, who is shown inserting an arrow into a dog's rectum. The second stage shows Nero, who is now a coach driver, and his cruelty caused his horse to break a leg. The third stage is called Cruelty in Perfection. Nero is now a murderer. And the fourth stage, called Reward of Cruelty, Nero is now being dissected after his execution, in keeping with the 1752 Act of Parliament allowing for the dissection of executed criminals convicted of murder. But at least he was already dead, unlike the vivisection that animals undergo at the hands of experimenters. Here is a surgeon practicing his craft on a live pig. Jean-Jacques Rousseau, the 18th century Genevan philosopher of the Enlightenment, who argued in his Discourse on Inequality for the inclusion of animals in natural law on the grounds of sentience, or the capacity to feel, perceive, and experience subjectivity, as distinct from the ability to think or reason. Jeremy Bentham was the English philosopher and founder of modern utilitarianism. Although he was opposed to the concept of natural rights, he argued that it was the ability to suffer that should be the benchmark of how we treat other beings. Quote, "The time will come when humanity extends its mantle over everything which breathes." Animal is any sentient living creature, from the Latin animale, living being, being which breathes. Animate, living of the air, from anima, breath, soul, a current of air. The 19th century, England, saw an explosion of interest in animal protection, or what is called jus animalium. Jus animalium is a legal term referring to animal rights or animal liberation. Animals are to be viewed as members of the moral community and not as property. Bills were introduced against bull baiting, which is a blood sport. Here's another example of bull baiting with dogs. The bills were defeated as anti-working class or as Jacobins trying to destroy Old English character. Here's another example of bull baiting with a bear or bear baiting. Here's an old woodcut of medieval London, and you can see the bull baiting pen and the bear baiting pen and the dogs being released from their pens. Badger baiting was also a favorite blood sport. Just bloodthirsty. The cruelty at Smithfield's meat market was also of great concern. This meat market dates from the 10th century and has been in continuous operation since medieval times. In 1822, the Martins Act was passed. This is also called the Cruel Treatment of Horses and Cattle Act. It was an act to prevent the cruel and improper treatment of cattle, introduced by Colonel Richard Martin, or Humanity Dick, as he was nicknamed by King George IV. It was the world's first animal protection legislation, given royal assent on June 22, 1822. And we'll find that this story is completely coded in 22. And when I see 22 now, I'm thinking 1111. Here's the trial of Bill Burns, the first prosecution under the Act, who was a costermonger or seller of street fruit, a street seller of fruit, arrested for beating a donkey. Humanity Dick paraded the animal's injuries before an astonished court. Offenders could be fined up to £5 or 2 months in jail. Burns was fined, and Martin was lampooned about how he relied on the testimony of an ass. Richard Martin was an Irish politician, a slavery abolitionist, and an early campaigner against the cruelty of animals. His family were Jacobites, which means they supported King James II and VII from the House of Stuart, the Roman Catholic monarchy. The Martins were one of the 14 tribes of Galway, the merchant families who ruled Galway from the 14th to the 17th century. Here is the Martin coat of arms, which put me in mind of the Rebus twins. Could they be implying twins upon the cross? We'll explore that notion a little later. The Martins came to Ireland in the Anglo-Norman invasion of 1170 with Strongbow, Richard de Clare, 2nd Earl of Pembroke. So, getting to the Royal Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Animals, supporters of the Martins Act wanted to figure out a way to enforce this act by instigating investigators or inspectors, especially in Smithfield Market. It was a meeting of 22 men. They gathered around the Reverend Arthur Broom, and I couldn't find any pictures of him, to create a voluntary organization promoting the kindness to animals. On June 16th, 1824, which I see a 666 there, they held a meeting at Old Slaughter's Coffee House in London, in St. Martin's Lane, Westminster. Here's Old Slaughter's Coffee House, also known as Old Slaughter's on the Pavement, as many streets in London were still not paved yet. The meeting was chaired by Thomas Fowle Buxton, MP, an abolitionist and social reformer, and also Quaker. Also, a founding member was Sir James Mackintosh, MP, Richard Martin, Humanity Dick, of course, William Wilberforce, the famous English abolitionist, and also this man, Louis Gompertz, the group's only vegan and Jew. He was the SPCA's second honorary secretary. However, the governing committee objected to Gompert's veganism, So they created a resolution that limited membership to Christians only, and he was forced to resign. So apparently it was worse to be a vegan than a Jew in Victorian England. In 1840, Queen Victoria allowed the society to add the royal prefix to their name, and the Queen is the patron of RSPCA to this day. Old Slaughter's Coffee House. Why was this so prominent in the foundation of the RSPCA? Let's have a look at the history of coffee houses in England to see the role that they played. The coffee houses were introduced to England in the mid-17th century from the Ottoman Empire and Arabia via Venice and Vienna. People gathered to drink coffee and debate and learn the news of the day in a sober environment. They played an important role in the development of financial markets and newspapers. They were great levelers, great social levelers, open to all and indifferent to social status. The public flocked to them. They were associated with equality and republicanism. Therefore, King Charles II tried to suppress them, but he was unsuccessful. The coffee houses were governed by the rules and orders of the coffee house, a 1674 broadside. Equality was to prevail. Quote, "No man of any station need give his place to a finer man," unquote. If one swore, there was a 12-pence fine. The topic of sacred things was barred, as well as speaking poorly of the state or religious scriptures. The rules forbade games of chance, which was rather satirical because games of chance, cards and dice, were played rampantly in the coffee houses. Francis Bacon had a hand in introducing coffee to England. He had a vision to advance human knowledge through the collection and classification of the natural world in order to understand its properties. He experimented with coffee for its medicinal qualities in the mid-16th century. Oxford is home to England's first coffee house, the Queen's Lane Coffee House, established in 1654. The first coffee houses were known as penny universities. They were frequented by the English virtuosi, pursuing advances in human knowledge. The English virtuosi were the forerunners of the Royal Society. Early Oxford virtuosi included Christopher Wren, the highly acclaimed architect of St. Paul's Cathedral and founder of the Royal Society; Anthony Wood, the antiquarian; and also John Evelyn, the great diarist, gardener, and early proponent of the vegetarian diet, and another founder of the Royal Society. Here is the crest of the Royal Society, and this states, take nobody's word for it, in Latin. The Oxford-style coffee houses spread quickly to London. At their height, there were about 3,000 of them. Lloyd's Coffee House was popular among the sailors, merchants, and ship owners. Their dealings led to the establishment of the great insurance market, Lloyd's of London. That's Lloyd's today. Jonathan's Coffee House grew into the London Stock Exchange. The Royal Exchange was officially opened in 1571 by Queen Elizabeth, probably the greatest, most popular, recognizable tranny of them all, and founded by the merchant Thomas Gresham. Stockbrokers weren't allowed into the Royal Exchange because of their rude manners, so they operated out of Jonathan's, which became the London Stock Exchange. Women were forbidden in the English and French coffee houses, unless you were a server or a proprietress or a prostitute or a cross-dresser or a tranny. Old Slaughter's Coffee House was opened in 1692 by Thomas Slaughter. Frequent members of the Slaughter set included Henry Fielding, author of Tom Jones, which is among the earliest English prose to be classified as a novel, in 1749. John Dryden, the English poet and translator and playwright, England's first poet laureate in 1668. He dominated the literary life of Restoration England. Here's his translation of the works of Virgil, but I would argue that Mr. Dryden probably wrote the works of Virgil. Sir Joshua Reynolds was also among the Slaughter set. He was an English portrait artist and a founder of the Royal Academy of Arts. Here's one of his portraits, Mrs. Baldwin in Eastern dress. I love that painting. Thomas Gainsborough, Reynolds' bitter rival, was also a portrait and landscape artist and founding member of the Royal Academy. Here's one of his portraits, Mrs. Sarah Siddons. And here's one of his landscapes called The Cottage Door. William Hogarth also frequented Old Slaughter's Coffee House. In fact, he had a drawing academy in St. Martin's Lane. Hogarth's father opened a Latin-speaking coffee house in St. John's Gate in 1704, but it failed, and Richard Hogarth spent 5 years in debtor's prison. Here's a drawing by Hogarth of St. John's Coffee House. And here is a depiction of Tom King's coffee house. There's a fight breaking out outside of it. This is from Hogarth's painting in 1736 called 4 Times of the Day. The proprietress of Tom King's coffee house was Moll King, a.k.a. Elizabeth Atkins, prominent figure in the 18th century London's underworld, a whore and joint owner of King's Coffee House with her husband in Covent Garden. Benjamin Franklin also attended Old Slaughter's, as it was a very popular chess club. He played chess with some of the finest chess players of the day, including Abraham de Moivre, the French mathematician, and André Danican Philidor, composer and finest chess player of his age. He developed the opera comique and set the novel Tom Jones to music. This is St. Martin's Lane. Old Slaughter's was torn down in 1843 to make way for the construction of Cranbourne Street. But you can see that St. Martin's Lane got its name from this church, St. Martin in the Fields. St. Martin in the Fields is an English Anglican church dedicated to St. Martin of Tours on Trafalgar Square in the northeast corner. There's been a church at this site since 1222, 1111. It was called in the fields because it was literally in the fields between the city of Westminster and the city of London at one time. Here's a picture of St. Martin in the Fields by William Logsdale. Here's an artist's rendering of the interior. In 1720, a sum of £22,000 was granted for the church's restoration. James Gibbs was selected to design the new church in the neoclassical style. St. Martin in the Fields is the parish church of the royal family, as well as with 10 Downing Street and the Admiralty, which is the command of the Royal Navy. I wanted to get some pictures of some royals attending St. Martin in the Fields. Here is Prince Harry and Meghan Markle attending St. Lawrence Day, which is commemorated every year on April 22nd, the day Stephen Lawrence was murdered in a racially motivated attack in 1993. Plenty of free Martins in St. Martin in the Fields. Here's St. Stephen Lawrence. I would argue that he's probably a tranny as well. Here he is as a young girl. Here's his mother, Baroness Doreen Lawrence, whom I would argue is probably a tranny as well. Here's the Queen Elizabeth attending the 70th anniversary of VJ Day at St. Martin in the Fields. This is Sir Neville Marriner. He's the English violinist who became one of the world's greatest conductors. He founded the Academy of St. Martin in the Fields, the most recorded of any orchestra and conductor. And he looks like a tranny to me as well. Here he is receiving his OBE, one of those very privileged overachiever trannies whom all doors are opened to. So who exactly is Saint Martin of Tours, and what has he to do with Free Martinism? Please join me in part 4, where we will explore these questions. Thank you for watching.